Hello and welcome to this ridiculously short summary of autism. It was expected to last about half an hour and it's ridiculously short because you really can't cover autism in just half an hour. It's just too vast, too massive. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Guest and I'm the Director and Chief Trainer and a few other things of Aspiedent. So Aspiedent, it's a tiny community interest company. It was actually set up to help autistic people stay in work and get work. I used to be a university lecturer and I was having difficulty because of my autism, and it became very clear that there was no organisation that could go into a situation like that where there was a difficulty between an employer and employee and give impartial advice, listen to both and be impartial. So we were set up to try and fill that gap. All the profit that we make goes into helping autistic people who are looking for work or need help understanding themselves or something like that. So basically Aspiedent is a combination of helping employers with difficulties with autistic employees, but also helping autistic adults either after they're diagnosed for post-diagnostic support or to help them into work. We are an autistic organisation. I'm autistic and I'm the director, so we're autism-led. The training is all being designed and developed and delivered by me. And I come from a very strong research background, hence the PhD and all the other letters. I'm a scientist, mathematician, so it's research from the scientific perspective, so it's looking at data, coming up with hypotheses, with theories, and then seeing, and then collecting more data. And every time I find data that doesn't fit what I've already got, well, obviously the theory has to change. Right, so let's start with a caricature of autism. So this girl there, she doesn't have autism and her world revolves around people. So she's interested in what people did at the weekend. She's interested in what they're going to do that evening. Just fairly typical, normal, loves babies, loves children, just likes people. And then this guy, he's autistic. And his world doesn't revolve around people, it revolves around things. It revolves around how things work, around theories, around facts, depending on the kind of autism. Because some people with autism are very geared towards facts, other people are more geared towards theories. But it is a caricature, and you will find people who aren't autistic somewhere along here as well. And there are autistic people who love people. We've come across quite a few of them. The problem that they have is that they don't have the social skills to be able to show people that they like people. So here's a diagram of the various components of what could be at stake with autism, what you could be dealing with. So many autistic people have sensory issues. So if we talk about social interaction, they might not actually be able to stand looking at your face as it's moving. They might have difficulty in busy places because of the visual noise of people just moving around. Loud noises can really upset them. Continuous noise can be a big distraction. Even what they're wearing can be a distraction. She says, feeling that herself. Many autistic people have extreme ways of thinking. The classic example of this one is temporal grandin. Quite a famous autistic person who is professor of animal sciences at a university in the States. I think it's Colorado State University. She goes around giving talks about her autism. And for her autism is effectively, well, she's got the sensory issues, but the key thing is that she thinks in pictures. So everything to do with her is pictures. Everything is stored in pictures. Everything is stored in a complete video. And she designs slaughterhouses, so she makes a video in her head of what it's going to be like and what it's going to be like for the cows. She pretends she's a cow to make the video in her head to see how they would cope with the facility. I've got a very extreme way of thinking. I think into about 6 dimensions, which I discovered by accident. And I make connections between lots of things that nobody else can see. It makes me an extremely good problem solver. Some people have difficulty with interest and focus. Some autistic people have a kind of tunnel focus. So all they can see, all they process, is what they are interested in at that particular point in time. And it can be really extreme, to the point where they can't cross the road by themselves safely, because they will focus on the car that's coming, and that car will come and it will pass. Right, okay, it's safe to cross the road. Well, it might not be, because there might be another one coming, or there might be another one coming from the other direction. But this is more often seen in extreme interest. So you might have animals, you might have cars, and the rest of the world doesn't exist. And this is how, people might be really good and knowledgeable in that subject of interest, but not be able to cope with everyday life because they've never built up a whole map of the world. It's very fragmented into their interests. And then other people, and I'm one of them, have processing issues. And this can vary from only being able to process 1 or 2 senses at a time, and the rest, all the other information's gone. Or somebody might be able to process some of what's coming in, and the rest gets stored and gets processed later when there's less information coming in. The way that affects me is that I can sort of process what's coming in through the eyes and the ears, but only to a certain extent. But I don't process emotion. So I can't process your emotion or my emotion because I'm too busy trying to figure out what you're telling me. And even with what you're telling me, it only gets processed for the raw meaning. It doesn't get processed for any form of personal significance at all. So for instance, to give an example, somebody once told me that a mutual acquaintance had had his car stolen. And it'd been stolen by somebody going in through the back door and taking the car keys. All I could think of at the time was the fact that that's a common way that people steal cars. But that's not what the person meant. She was trying to get me to appreciate the fact that he was really upset that his car had been stolen. It took me 3 days to process that far. So processing issues can be a major thing. And these things all drive to the drive to connect and a drive to fit in. Some autistic people have a really strong drive to connect and a drive to fit in, but they can't because of all these other things. Other people, just like the general population, doesn't have a particular drive to connect and fit in. And they're the ones that tend to excel more at whatever it is they're interested in. It's really difficult being an autistic person with a very strong drive to connect to people and fit in. Because they just can't do it in the way that everyone expects them to, that they put all this effort into masking their autism, and it keeps failing. So if you've got one of these an autistic person in your workplace, what can you expect? Well, not all autistic people will have all of these, but what you can expect is things like some of them have an absolutely amazing eye for detail. So they are really good for data entry, finding errors in things. We recently trained a company that runs software where you need to recognise the make and model of the car, and they had autistic people recognising the ones that the software couldn't cope with. You need an eye for detail to do that. Other things you need eye for detail is radiography. For all the scans and things that come in, you need to be able to see the detail to see the defect. Especially for things like finding cancer cells. In hundreds of other cells, you've got to find the few ones that show cancerous characteristics. Not easy. Quite a few autistic people have an absolutely amazing memory. Now, I'm past 50, and the person who works with me is in her 20s. My memory should be fading, and it is, but it still beats my co-worker hands down. So imagine what it was like when I was in my 20s. This is not at all unusual in autism. A lot of autistic people, maybe about half, are really, really good at creative thinking. I once did an experiment. I had 8 autistic people in a room and I gave them some creative thinking exercises. Those exact same creative thinking exercises were also given to a group of about 80 entrepreneurs. 8 autistic people came up with more ideas than 80 entrepreneurs did with the creative thinking. They beat them hands down. And only about half of the group contributed because the other half were more of the amazing eye for detail kind. So you want creative thinking done, get some autistic people in. It might just work. Patterns and connections. There's quite a few autistic people out there, really good. They see patterns and connections that nobody else sees. For instance, fraud. We know of a company who employed an autistic person in the fraud department. Well, when he goes on holiday, nobody else has anything to do because he's the one that recognises the fraud in all these numbers. You know, it's amazing. And problem solving is another one. You know, why are there so many autistic people in IT? Programming's all about problem solving. A lot of autistic people excel at problem solving, you know, especially the logical problem solving, you know, the things like Sudokus, you know, the ones that need logic. But in order to program, you need logic. Right, so there are other qualities. A lot of autistic people are good at being very focused on their work. They're less distracted by wanting to talk and chat and gossip. Honesty, integrity kind of goes with autism. There are a few exceptions, but for the large part you will find them actually too honest. And they tend to be very conscientious. There are exceptions, but that is generally what you will find. So here is a very quick sort of schema of autism and not autism as well. So this red ball, blue ball up there with little bubbles on it, that is your normal, well-adjusted person. This one, the other blue one with the yellow spikes on it, that's your maverick. That's your person who's always seeing better ways of doing things, wants to change things for the better, annoys everybody else because everybody else would rather things stayed as they were. The two at the bottom here, those are your autistic ones. And they are characterised with a very spiky profile. So you'll tend to find that autistic people excel at some things, but are completely useless at the things that everybody else finds easy. So, for example, when I was working as a university lecturer, I could solve problems that nobody else could solve, even if they were outside my area. In fact, there was a problem to do with databases, and I'm not a database expert. It went round all the database experts, and they couldn't solve it. Landed back on my desk, I'd solved it within a couple of hours. So I can solve problems, but don't ask me to arrange a meeting. So if you do that, it won't happen. Don't ask me to fill in a travel form, because that won't happen either. What happens doesn't happen the way it should happen. So, and then the one in the middle there, you see the problem with autism is there's no real hard and fast dividing line between autism and not autism. So you'll always have people on the borderline who are maybe not quite as spiky as but more spiky than with the ability profile. Something that people don't understand about autism, because it's a hidden disability. And if you think about it, the symbol for disability is a wheelchair. You know, and somebody's in a wheelchair, and there's a party they want to go to, and there's steps to get there. Well, they're not going to get there because it's impossible to wheel yourself in a wheelchair up the steps. But the best you can do is to get yourself out the wheelchair and haul yourself up on your bum up the steps. Hopefully, you know, you might be able to drag the wheelchair with you, or you might have to abandon it. But if you abandon it, then you're a bit stuck when you get to the top. But that's fairly obvious. People understand that. They don't have any difficulty working out that that's a problem. Whereas they have great difficulty working out that, well, it happens to be an autistic person who does like socialising, and she would like to go and socialise with her friends and be with her friends, but she can't do it because there's so much noise. Well, you can see the noise with the musical things, you know, it's coming out the room, and the social interaction is exhausting. There's just too many people, but she would still like to be with her friends. Now, travel can be a major problem with autistic people. You know, you just imagine it's first thing in the morning, you're trying to get to work on the train. It doesn't have to be a Virgin train, could be any train. First of all, you've got the crowds of people to get through. You know, say you've got a season tickets, you at least don't have to buy one. Right, you get on the train, what do you have to contend with? People talking on mobile phones. You know, maybe the crowding. People wearing their favourite perfume or aftershave. Very, very inconsiderate. Because it stinks. Well, that can be too much for people. Right, the train gets moving. You've got things flashing past the windows. That's an awful lot of visual noise. That can produce sensory overload. Yeah. You've got people's emotions flying around. Even first thing in the morning, people have emotions. And they emit them. And again, that just causes sensory overload. It can be a nightmare travelling on public transport. What we quite often suggest is for people with these problems is they don't work 9 till 5 like everybody else, but they work something like 10 till 6. So that they can, so that they can travel in the off-peak times, even if they're driving. You know, it's not a major adjustment that, or they could work 8 till 4 instead, whatever best suits. Right, communication. It's a key thing. People say that autistic people understand things literally. Well, it's not always the case. Sometimes people are not clear in their instructions. And this is often what we find. You know, the common one is, can you do something? Which to most of the population is basically an order, do something. But to an autistic person, it's a question. Can you do something? Yes. Now, the autistic person has answered the question, yes, I can do it, but hasn't realised that the person wanted them to do it. Meanwhile, the manager has thought that they've agreed to do it, and then there's trouble when it's not done. Whose fault was it? I would suggest it's the manager for not actually making it clear that they wanted the person to do it. You know, for some reason in English, the imperative has become offensive. I'm not quite sure why. Why not give an order? Why do you have to say, do you want or can you? So anyway, in this little cartoon here, Emily is told by her mother to go and empty the bin in the kitchen. This is actually an ambiguous phrase, because is the location in the kitchen attached to the action of emptying or the location of the bin? Could be either. There's no way of knowing in English which one it is. So Emily empties the bin in the kitchen because bin and kitchen are closer. And emptying, you know, makes sense. Of course, mother's upset. Emily has no idea what she's done wrong. And this kind of thing is repeated over and over again just because somebody hasn't made it clear. So a lot of it is context, and it's the context that is getting lost. And the person giving the command or the instruction not making themselves clear. Like computers. Computers do exactly what you tell them, not what you thought you told them. And this drives everybody up the wall, most people. Because they think they've told the computer something, but actually they haven't. And the computer just does what you tell it, not what you thought you told it. So the same thing with a computer, you've got to give it a very clear instruction. So this is a very common one in the workplace. A simple question, how are you? This causes all kinds of problems for autistic people. Does the person actually want to know? Or is it kind of a code for hello? And how do you know? Most autistic people will treat it as the question, how are you, and tell you, even if you're not interested. But you've asked them. So why don't you want to know the answer? We actually spent 15 minutes trying to persuade somebody that how are you was actually code for hello. Because all he could say was, well, why don't they just say hello then? This is another one that catches people out a lot. Should we like my new shirt? You're not allowed to say no. Why not? You've asked me a question. Why don't you want an honest answer?
Yeah.
Why bother asking the question if you don't want an honest answer?
Yeah.
Whereas what the person really wants is a bit of ego stroking. Weird. You know, you think we're weird. Actually, I think you're the weirdest ones. So there's another one, reading between the lines. Something, I don't know how people do it. Complete mystery. So here's an example here where the autistic husband has not managed to read between the lines and just says, yeah, it is disgusting. Does need tidying up. Whereas what his wife meant was that he should tidy it up. But she didn't actually tell him that, so why should he bother? But the problem is that this works back in the other direction of autistic people don't put things between their words for you to read. So if you read anything that's in there, it can only be a figment of your imagination. So if you are then offended by reading between the lines, you are offended by your own imagination. It's the only way I can explain it. I think this is what happens when people get offended by reading between the lines between non-autistic people as well. They're just offended by their own imaginations, own jumping to conclusions. There you are. I hope that was reasonably instructive and entertaining. We have some services for people that are interested. So we have understanding autism training. We call it understanding training because we get behind the symptoms to what's going on underneath. Awareness just tells you the symptoms. Whereas to work with autistic people, you need to know what's going on underneath so that you can figure out how best to deal with them. We do social skills training for autistic people that helps them understand themselves. It also helps them understand what this weird thing called social chit-chat is all about. It's just boring, it's not interesting, but people love to do it. Why? It's actually because it's about building relationships, but autistic people prefer to build relationships in different ways. We'll do consultancy if there's a problem. Workplace assessments is quite a big thing. So if you're actually having a problem with an employee, we will come in, talk to you, talk to your employee, try and figure out what's going on and make recommendations. Every time we have done that, it has helped. We've actually got some quite major success stories on that one. We'll help people with inclusive recruitment. We can explain why psychometric testing is actually discriminatory with autistic people, probably quite a number of others as well. And also, once you've got that autistic person and they need support, we can provide advice with obtaining access to work funding. Thank you for listening, and are there any questions?